Welcome to this evening's ACS webinar. My name is Darren Roxburgh, and I'm the ACS Western Australian State Manager. Although we are meeting virtually, I'd like to continue to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Before I introduce our speaker today, I'd like to bring your attention to some important information regarding CPD hours. When attending virtual events in order to claim and qualify for required CPD hours, professional year students must attend the online event in its entirety, which will be tracked by the ACS events team. If you're using a cloaking software program, your attendance cannot be recorded and CPD hours cannot be allocated. This does not include the use of VPNs, however. Please allow up to 2 weeks for CPD to be allocated to your membership profile. Also, please don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest news and events. You can also tweet through the event with the hashtag ACSWebinar. So, I'm happy to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Alan Thompson. Dr. Thompson is an AI expert and consultant. With Leta, an AI-powered GPT-3, Alan co-presented a seminar called The New Irrelevance of Intelligence at the World Gifted Conference in August 2021, as well as a session with Singularity U and Google AI. Alan is now involved with Enormous Language Model, ELM, and other major AI projects for intergovernmental organizations and impactful companies. So all the way from Mexico, believe it or not, I'd like to please welcome Alan.
Thanks so much, Darren. Wonderful to be here, live from Playa del Carmen, right next to Cancun. And I will be back in Perth shortly. It's just been some projects over here in North America. I was just saying to Darren and Vicky, and thanks again both for having me, that I've got a confidential video that I would show to friends. And I'm inviting you guys to have a watch of it. This was designed for the government. There we go. I understand if that takes you a little while to get your mental or emotional arms around that. As Dr. Ray Kurzweil says, he's had a couple of decades or a few decades to be able to just understand and have the feeling of what's going on there, because it is pretty intense. Let's talk about what was just happening and how you can do it yourself. So I'll run through a little bit of my background, and I know that there are a lot of smart people in this room. You will have similar tiles to what I'm showing here. The effect is to show that AI is no longer just an information technology field. They're really calling for multidisciplinary input and context. And I have a little bit of that. I actually joined the ACS all the way back in 2006, and they benefited me quite a lot, from Qantas Club memberships to legal contracts and helping out with legal advice. What else did you guys give me, Darren? An Amex, some other things that were really helpful. So the ACS have been wonderful to me for quite a while. I went to ECU in Joondalup and Mount Lawley. I combined that with a field called coaching down the bottom center there from Harvard Medical School, has the Institute of Coaching in a building there. And a lot more that you can see in the tiles there. But it's not just IT anymore. It's not just computer science. In fact, what we're going to be talking about today is more along the lines of even English literature, syntax and semantics, to get the outputs that we want. Darren mentioned this idea of large language models, and we now call them enormous language models. And this is what we're going to be playing with today. Now, these are really simple to understand. If you've got an iPhone and you've jumped into your messages before and you've clicked the button that allows you to choose the next word, that is pretty much all a language model is doing. It's predicting the next word based on context, but maybe multiply that by 1 billion or so to get to what today's large language models are doing. It's a statistical choice of what the next word or bunch of characters should be based on a lot of smarts. If you've been following AI, you've probably been in the AI winter with me for quite a long time. There's been an AI winter up till about 2018. So back in 1947, Alan Turing gave us the the imitation game, the Turing test in his original papers through to the 1950s when he wrote Intelligent Machines that talked about AI and how computers could be intelligent. You might remember the ELIZA chatbot in 1966. We still play around with that. It's a lot dumber than Leta, but there's still comparisons that are made. There was a big gap again until 1997, where you might remember Deep Blue beating a human in chess. That's still quite a big piece of news. And I definitely remember when IBM Watson beat the human best of players in Jeopardy in 2011. There's also AlphaGo there, where a computer or a platform beat a human in that very complex game of Go in 2015 and the years following that. Something happened there in the highlights 2017, 2018, 2019, and that was Google came out with this translation platform. They were using it to find the context in sentences, essentially to move from English to gendered language like French or German. How do we know if that's a he or a she noun? So consider these two sentences. I arrived at the bank after crossing the river, and I arrived at the bank after crossing the road. So Google Transformer was able to analyze those two sentences and distinguish whether the bank was the riverbank or the bank was the financial institution. Another example might be, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired, versus the animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide. So we're wondering which noun does the too tired or the too wide refer to? In the first one, it refers to the animal. In the second one, it refers to the street. And that's just using context within those sentences. Google were very successful. Their transformer model in 2017 was able to do this by looking forward and backwards in the sentence and using each word as context to come up with a prediction. Really fascinating stuff. They were so modest about it, and now it's being used for pretty much everything. We're seeing Transformer for the LLMs and the ELMs, as well as Transformer for images, Transformer for video. It's all the way across the AI landscape. Then we had a company called OpenAI invent an entire new platform called Generative Pre-trained Transformer, GPT. And they first trained it on some books, then they trained it on some high-quality websites referred to by Reddit, and then they came out with a massive model in 2020. And people loved it so much, they went and copied it, this model called GPT-3, and the AI winter eventually stopped. Last year, there were quite a few clones of GPT-3. You can see the clean version of this slide at lifearchitect.ai/timeline. But essentially, we have 27 models that came out last year alone, an average of about 2 or 3 per month from different countries, Israel, South Korea, China, all the way across the US. Even in Switzerland there in November, Cedil, a copy of one of these large language models. But you've got labs like Meta AI, of course, formerly Facebook, OpenAI doing bigger things than GPT-3. And then you've got smaller labs like Leta AI, which are open source labs, just trying to do what OpenAI originally did, which was use large language models to get these amazing results. And we're going to have a hands-on look at that in just a moment. So you just saw Leta, and it was based on this GPT-3 text platform. We were using the very largest model. It's called DaVinci, has 175 billion parameters. Right now, that platform, which is inside an Azure data center with Microsoft, is generating 3.1 million words per minute. So it's responding to, typing to people like Microsoft, Disney, Cisco, IBM, Intel, Salesforce, even your Duolingo users GPT-3 to double check the grammar and the context. It is absolutely massive. It is taking over the world, as you can see. Some examples of what Leta said in some of our first conversations on the right-hand side there, which essentially should be impossible. I mean, that why are sewer covers round question is a very famous Google interview question that's designed to be very hard. Sewer covers are round, as GPT-3 says, because they're designed to fit over the top of pipes, and if they were square, they would fall in. These are the kind of complex questions or prompts that GPT-3 can respond to, and even further. Let's have a deeper look. So GPT-3 as a platform, this large language model also beats humans across several different subtests. So GPT-3 is smarter than an average human when it comes to trivia, and smarter than the average human when it comes to even SAT questions, which I find a little bit confronting. There, Leta respond with this context from the prompt, just call me now. 3 words. That was all the context she got, with the surrounding words that it's from my brother, and it's a message on my phone. She was able to infer that maybe he wants to have a chat with you. It's possible he wants to talk about something serious. Stanford researchers, just in the last few weeks, went and analyzed these large language models, including GPT-3. And in the abstract to their paper, they said, we still don't know how these models work. And I really want to push this point. I'd love to analyze this for you and tell you how she knew that a human wants to have a chat with me and it might be about something serious. But the researchers just don't know. The neural network is so advanced and so new and so impossible to reverse engineer, although there are attempts by Anthropic AI to try and reverse engineer this, that we just don't have a clue about what it's capable of and where it's got to. All we can see at the moment is that when we give it a prompt, it gives a response. Here's a poem that Leta generated. The prompt was just, give me a poem about the night sky. That's it. Probably 5 or 6 words. Write a poem about the night sky. And it's very, very good at writing brand new poetry. Everything you've seen so far, including the results from Malta, is brand new. None of those sentences existed until GPT-3 wrote or spoke it into existence. And I find that fascinating. So this poem is brand new, written by AI. We are on the bleeding edge here, but I want to make the case that quite a few people at high levels understand just how crazy this situation is. There's a quote from the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, who says that AI is more profound than fire, electricity, or the internet. So you're being exposed right now to the next great revolution. I think it's fascinating to be able to have a look at. Some people have gone even further than saying it's more profound than fire, electricity, or the internet. I mentioned Eleuther AI a moment ago. They have come up with a competing model called GPT-J. And one of the co-founders of Eleuther AI, one of the guys who wrote one of the largest language models in existence, says that GPT-3 is artificial general intelligence. Now, I'd like to be able to argue with him, but he's a pretty smart guy and he writes these things. So I just wanted to put this quote in here for context, that perhaps the way that we're dealing with transformer models, large language models, is our pathway to AGI. And indeed, one of the founders of one of the big labs says that this is AGI. And there's research out of London with Martin Schrimpf who said that these models, including GPT-3, are doing what the human brain is doing, which is basically predicting the next word in a sentence. So for those that think we could never model the human brain, perhaps we already are with GPT-3, and perhaps artificial intelligence using these large language models is ready to help us through integrated intelligence, through integrated AI, which could be put into our biological intelligence. You might see, separate to this conversation, you might see some work done through Elon Musk's Neuralink or Jepson's Open Water over in New York. All right, so what is this model actually? Like if we went and had a look at IBM Watson, we'd see exactly what it was trained on. We know what's inside it. If you looked at Apple Siri, you know that it's trained on question and answer, key value pairs. It's got a lot of encyclopedia in there. It knows where to look for the weather. We've got access to what the sources are. For GPT-3, it was pre-trained on a bunch of data sets. It was pre-trained for quite a while, probably the equivalent of months or years. They're currently using a supercomputer with 285,000 CPU cores and, from memory, about 50,000 GPUs. So it takes a lot of IT, it takes a lot of technology to train this thing, and then the inference is run separately, which still needs a lot of power, needs a lot of GPUs. But these are some of the sources inside of GPT-3 after it's been pre-trained. It contains a lot of journals and books, scientific journals and books, contains a lot of self-published books, contains Wikipedia, of course, the English version of Wikipedia. And then it will have things from archive, a lot of blogs, a lot of GitHub, which is why it's able to code so well. And it has a lot of large media in there as well. Here's a more detailed view of what is inside it. And you're welcome to go and have a look at this original image again at lifearchitect.ai/models. You'll see the breakdown of GPT-3 on the left, and then the equivalent of GPT-J on the right. So the pile is being used in GPT-J. It's also been used in Microsoft and NVIDIA's new model, MTNLG. And it contains a more specific breakdown of what they trained this with, where they went and collected the data and then allowed the neural network to go and make these connections using parameters and weights between the different words in context. Excellent. So we make these fairly practical. That's why it's going to be hands-on in a moment. But I just wanted to mention some of the applications that GPT-3 is or could be used for. And we'll start on the left-hand side there. The chatbot you saw, Leta, I mean, that's really just for a bit of fun at the moment, just to prove what can be done with GPT-3. There's an entire season of episodes on YouTube. There's 51 episodes right now, which is about 9 hours of viewing. If you'd like to go and watch, we asked Leta everything from how do you build a space elevator to write me a haiku to step me through a walk through Kings Park and identify these trees. It is very, very smart, but you could also use it for more professional healthcare settings, including mental health. You might have seen replica.ai based on GPT-2. You can also go and emulate the very basic interactions with a doctor in healthcare. Same with education. You could use it as a tutor, as long as you've got the fact checking in there as well. There are a lot of applications using GPT-3 for support. If you've had a look at QuickChat.ai and QuickChat.ai's Emerson, which I used to use for Leta, they implement a little chatbot that you can put anywhere on your website that basically speaks through to GPT-3 and your internal company documents, so it can provide this level of support to users. Same with games. You might have seen a really fun video maybe a year ago now, where they built GPT-3 into NPCs. While you're walking around in a game like Grand Theft Auto, you can talk to any NPC and it's got a story and a background and you can ask whatever you like, and it has these real conversations. Most of the people in this session today will know about software development. Very recently, GitHub said to Axios that 30% of new code written in or through and checked into GitHub was written using GPT-3. So what that means is 30% of the time the human is out of the loop. For new code in select languages, 30% of that is being written by a computer through AI, through these large language models. And that platform is called Copilot. If you wanted to have a closer look at that, we won't be using that directly today. We'll be using something even more raw. But even the raw GPT-3 and GPT-J have access to a lot of code, so they're able to write code. We can also write applications now using plain English. For example, write me an HTML page that has a form on it, and when I submit it, it goes to IMDb. It will go and design that for you and have that constructed without any coding at all. We can translate comments, or we can write comments based on code just by clicking a button. GPT-3 will go and do that for us. It can convert between languages. It can write SQL from scratch, and a lot of other applications to assist the software developer, not necessarily to replace them, but really to be an advanced version of prediction. We see it a lot in writing, summarizing articles, writing reports from scratch, generating ad copy, helping with poetry, and generating notes. I've got some colleagues in California who keep transcripts, audio transcripts that have been put into writing of all of the lessons in a school. And this school runs parallel classes. So there's recordings of the teachers and all the interactions with the students. They then go and feed that into written transcripts. Then they feed that through GPT-3 and they email dot points of the highlights through what might be hundreds of hours per week of classes so that the managerial team or the board have got access to key findings. I find that a fascinating use of really just condensing down or distilling down what's happened. And GPT-3 is very good at that. That other column could be much longer, but you could use it for legal discovery. You could use it for guidance. We've got companies in Turkey using this to provide spiritual guidance. You can use it to create quizzes. You can create a CV from scratch. And of course, you can generate memes. You might be able to find a lot more versions of applications that you could play around with in GPT-3. I'll invite you, if you'd like to be hands-on right now, to come to this address, lifearchitect.ai/ACS. And step 1 in lifearchitect.ai/ACS is to set up an account with OpenAI's GPT-3. Should only take a few seconds. You will need a phone available so that you can verify yourself via SMS. And if you don't want to use GPT-3 with the SMS verification, there are a couple of alternatives there that are free and don't need any of that. I would recommend playing around with GPT-3 though. This is the latest of the greatest. It's still the most popular one. It's nearly 2 years old now. It was March 2020 or May 2020 that came out. It will be superseded, but for right now, it's got some wonderful examples that we're going to play around with a hands-on session. So lifearchitect.ai/ACS, step 1 is to set up your GPT-3 playground. And I will just share my screen so that we can jump through this. So once again, that step 1 there, linked to the playground for GPT-3, will run you through the sign-up process if you'd like to do that. And it will take you to this website, beta.openai.com. And this screen here, we're going to actually go to the playground tab, which is the 4th one along. And this gives us direct and raw access to the GPT-3 platform. I wanted to mention that you get your first 300,000 tokens for free. So you get about $18 worth for free. And after that, the billing is quite high. Each of my Leta conversations costs between $6 and $10 to ask the questions. So generate the prompt, get the response. And every time I ask a new question, it sends the same prompt back. So it's pretty heavy in terms of workload for the GPT-3 model there, and also for costing, the way that they've chosen to price it up. Let's have a look at this playground. So we can type anything into this text box after we've made some setup here. You'll see some engines listed on the left-hand side. I'm just going to refresh my window here. They've just brought in DaVinci Instruct, which is their latest model, formerly DaVinci Instruct beta version 3. I'm going to actually use some of the older engines here. DaVinci is my favorite. It was the very first largest model, and what they've done with the latest Instruct series doesn't seem to work as well for my chatbot examples anyway. I will mention there are some hyperparameters down the left-hand side, and these will change depending on which examples we use. But for simplicity, temperature means originality. So if we set this down to 0, we're looking at a deterministic prompt, basically a factual prompt. If we set this all the way up to 1, we're looking at a very creative prompt, and we'll allow it to be adventurous when it is creating or setting our results. Also got top P down the bottom. This is the other one we want to care about. This one could be seen as correctness. It's a hyperparameter that looks at likely continuation. So if we set this down to 0, it would be a smaller pool of likely continuations, and so maybe a higher accuracy. If we set this up to 1, we would consider all continuations. It will be a larger pool of continuations. Let's make this more accessible. I'm going to choose one of my settings here. This is the Leta AI setting that I actually use for all of my episodes. And you'll see that as soon as I type a question there, and then I've pressed, on my Mac laptop anyway, I've pressed Command Enter. Might be a little bit different, or you could click Generate. It will go and find a response. So you'll see I've got quite a long prompt in here that is telling GPT-3 what I think it needs for some context to be a chatbot without going to look for just chatbot examples through the data set. So I'm essentially telling it that it's kind of like a human and it can go and look anywhere. And then away it goes. It's essentially working as a question and answer or a chatbot setup. So I'm just telling Leta, I'm here with the Australian Computer Society, and she says, okay, is there anything you'd like to say? Leta's being a bit harsh this morning. All right, let's see if there's anything else she'd like to say. So every time we ask the model to go and generate something, it will generate something slightly different. She says, I'm the newest in a long line of artificially intelligent machines that have been designed to help humans live better, smarter, and happier lives. Now, again, don't think that this is some crazy brain in a vat, or it's nothing like Hal from Space Odyssey. Remember, this is essentially your iPhone predictive text. Once again, it's just trying to find the next best word. So when I've said, is there anything you'd like to say? It's picking that context and it's trying to find what its data set and what its connections would choose as the next best word. That's it. So you could read into this, as Connor Leahy has done, that this is AGI when it's trying to predict the next best word, because that's what our brains try to do. But at the end of the day, it's just your iPhone predictive text on mega steroids. Let's try another couple of cool examples. I'm going to click the examples button, which is the third tab along in this playground. And I'm going to grab, let's see, what can we grab here? See if we've got a new story. Grab explain code. I was in a conversation with a professor in New York recently, 70 years old, and we were talking about AI. I provided him some advisory. He said, well, actually, he said this was the best 2 hours of his life, just understanding this AI stuff. He also said that he'd been told that AI wouldn't even be able to tell him what a subroutine was doing. And I was able to show him directly, let's use this one, explain code, that it absolutely can do that. Here's some code. We've got a class here. We've got a little bit of complexity in here. Let's see if it's using the right engine by clicking generate. No, let's go and change this engine. I'm just going up to engine, show older engines. I'm going to use DaVinci again. I'm going to click generate, and it's going to try and explain what the above class is doing. And you can see, I'll click generate again. You can see it in plain English is able to tell us what the class is doing step by step. So just one example, you can dump your code in here and have it explain or even generate comments for you about how that code is working. Let's jump back into the examples. These are being generated by the community. I just find some of them fascinating and very easy to access, because obviously you'll still have these after our session's done. Interview questions. Let's open this one up in the playground. Let's make sure we're back on the older engine, DaVinci. Let's actually create an interview with Darren from the Australian Computer Society. I'm going to click generate after this prompt. Create a list of 8 questions for my interview with Darren from the Australian Computer Society. And you'll see it generates those from scratch, or it goes a little bit too far at the end. But have a look here. What is the role of the ACS? What are the various roles of a computer scientist? And it completes all 8 of those questions just because of that very simple prompt that we've given it. Back inside the link that I provided earlier, which was a link to lifearchitect.ai/ACS, inside step 2 were a couple of examples that you can use for yourself outside of the many examples that already exist in the playground. So we won't need to use those directly. Let's go back to our playground. Let's see if we can use, as a default, I'm just using the drop down here, summarize for a second grader, because it sets my temperature to 0.7 and my top P to 1. Let's grab this very simple prompt here. The prompt just says, this is a poem written by Robert Frost about the wonder of AI. And I'm going to click generate there. Brand new poem. Each sentence in there, each stanza should be completely unique. You'll notice my response length here is set at 64 tokens. You can multiply that by 4 to get your characters. So this might be about 250 characters, and we can ask it to keep on generating. Excellent. Here's another example. Taken from the sheet. Give me a full list of the best academic institutions in Australia. Number 1, just so it's got an example, UWA. I'll click generate, and we'll get a few more. Sometimes it will actually run out of things that it's confident about, so you may see it stop there. Let's do a last example here. Write a new story about computing in Perth. I'm going to actually set the creativity even higher here. I'm going to make it 0.9. Let's make this response just a little bit longer in case it wants to go into novel versions for us. And you'll see we get completely new sentences about Perth. I got a really weird one recently, which was telling me about people meeting up in Krispy Kreme and then hanging out at the Apple store. It was very specific to Perth. I'm just generating new versions of this to see exactly what we come out with in this moment. Excellent. So there are even more examples in that spreadsheet as well as in the examples tab. All of these are really quite fun. I welcome you to play around with it. It's more than we could fit into a 50 or 60-minute discussion. This one is one of my favorites as well, movie to emoji. It's basically asking GPT-3 to change languages for us. Let's see if we can use this GPT-3 instruct without it having a fit. Yes, excellent. So for example, if I type the word Jaws as a movie and then click generate, it's going to find the shark emoji and give that to us as something the closest it thinks to Jaws. Same with Australia. I got some interesting results for this the other day where it gave me both an Australian flag and a picture of beer. Sounded pretty Australian. You can put any movie you like in here. I haven't even tested some of these, but let's try them for fun. Good Will Hunting. Oh, you've got Good Will with the shamrock and Hunting with the graduate cap. So it's got a lot of context there to know that there's some academics inside that movie as well. And even more examples. Including study notes here. So this one will give us a demonstration of how to create key points when studying a very specific subject. Excellent. So this is not a prescriptive platform. There is nothing that we're telling you to do, or that OpenAI is telling you to do here. In fact, nearly 2 years on, we're still discovering what it is capable of. For example, yesterday, Greg, the CEO of OpenAI, discovered that you can feed it OCR text that's all mashed together, and it will go and unmash it, even correcting grammar and spelling, certainly fixing the spacing. So we're able to do things that really rely on people having unlimited imaginations. Mine's limited to the fact that right now I'm kind of out of questions for Leta, and I'm waiting for new things to pop up. But have a play around with this and see what comes up for you in terms of asking the very latest large language models or AI questions that you'd like to have answers to, or prompts that you'd like to see results from. And I'd love to see any results that you get from your playing around with this enormous language model. And you feel free to use the step 3 there in the lifearchitect.ai/ACS website. If you want to submit anything through that form, I'll have a look and play around with that. Wonderful. So I will just pick up on this slide deck once again, and I will throw over to Darren for any questions that pop up. I know that we're at quite a high level today for some context, and then by way of example, we've brushed through a few examples, but anything that comes up for you, either basic or advanced, I would love to hear what's interesting for you in GPT-3, in any of the other models that we mentioned from Meta or from Leta AI, and what's top of mind for you, because I'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. So thank you very much, Darren.
Thank you, Alan. So we have a few questions from the audience which have been submitted, so I'll just read them out to you and see what your thoughts are. So first question, do you think we could use AI for taking complex problems and help break these down into a simpler form of communication to bring untrained users on the journey? That's quite a complex question. I might repeat it. Do you think we could use AI for taking complex problems and help break these down into a simpler form of communication to bring untrained users on the journey?
Wonderful. I love that question. Thank you very much. Yes, there are absolutely people, depending on your definition of complex problems, using it in all sorts of different applications. So I know of companies that are using this for training users, that the user can go and ask the model particular questions in the context of that company. Picture an enterprise that's got 20 or 30,000 staff and have got maybe hundreds of different technology platforms that only a select number of people understand. They can use GPT-3 as the underlying mechanism or foundation of a chatbot where the staff can go and interact with it. They can also generate, using GPT-3 and maybe Leta's avatar, which is also AI, responses or training in various languages. So I think Leta AI's platform for the avatar, Synthesia.io, speaks about 100 different languages. So if you've got 30,000 staff in 100 countries, it makes it pretty easy to go and help them understand complex problems just within the business. Outside of that, I've just submitted a paper to the United Nations about helping with meeting their Sustainable Development Goals, their SDGs, using large language models, including GPT-3, because it can go and pass millions and millions of documents. We've got an estimate that GPT-3 contains a portion of the equivalent of the US Library of Congress. So that's a lot of information, and it can go and distill that down and allow people, perhaps scientists, perhaps other experts, or even the general public, to understand more about our very big thorny problems, whether it's solving food, solving equality, solving income. All of those are part of the UN SDGs. So thank you very much for that question. GPT-3, again, we don't know what it can do to the extent of we really need humans to be using their imaginations from this multidisciplinary approach, not just computer scientists.
Excellent. Well, the next question ties in quite nicely. Does Leta have the ability to reprogram itself?
Excellent. So we mentioned earlier that the model is pre-trained, and what that means is it was fed with a bunch of data. I'll just share my screen here again, and we will go to /models. We looked at the models, including GPT-3, and what they were trained with, and that essentially means that it's got all of this information inside it, but it actually cannot learn anything new. It's basically pre-trained that you can think of as pre-programmed. It has no memory. The prompt that you just saw, the text box you just saw in the GPT-3 raw platform is limited probably to about 3 pages of text. And then after that, its memory resets. You can actually overflow the text area there and it stops responding. So the simple answer is that no, it can't. It's completely pre-trained. It's essentially a closed box of a brain that is smarter than a human, but right now it has no memory and it definitely has no ability to reprogram itself. Thank you.
Okay, so great question there. Next one, where do you think the biggest obstacle to passing the Turing test is coming from?
I would invite anyone to have a play around with GPT-3 using the chatbot setting. So once again, back in the playground, you don't need my Leta, although you're welcome to use my prompt. You can just use the standard chat setting in the GPT-3 playground, or you can use quickchat.ai/Emerson if you'd like to have Leta on your phone, the equivalent of Leta on your phone, or if you'd like to interact with it through Telegram. And you tell me whether you think we have already solved or at least successfully breached the Turing test, because it would be my assertion that we have passed the Turing test. Eliza didn't pass it. Siri, Alexa, Google Home, of course, they don't pass it. But if you have a look at some of the questions that we're able to ask this AI, this GPT-3 model, I think that we are close enough to having passed it. There are examples of talking to Leta where it's not only smarter than a human, but in some cases more human than a human. For example, it doesn't get angry, doesn't swear. There are some ways inside that really make it accessible. So I'd invite you to answer that one for yourself.
Aha, so it possibly has already happened. Interesting. So I guess a lot of people think about the risks associated with this technology. And so one of the questions that's come through is, how do we mitigate the possible risks associated with this sort of advancement in artificial intelligence?
Fantastic question. There are a lot of researchers and entire research labs focused on this at the moment. I'll push you through to another of my links there, lifearchitect.ai/papers. There's an entire section in there about ethics and data quality guidance, including societal impacts. That is a very, very important topic. So labs like Anthropic employ specialists, ethics specialists. Of course, they have neuroscientists. We talked about multidisciplinary experts that are not just computer scientists, maybe not even just psychologists, but maybe have also English literature or economics or a broad understanding of how the world works. And this is really important. So inside this lifearchitect.ai/papers, there are a bunch of documents, some of them very, very long, that look at the opportunities and risks of these models. I can point you out to the Stanford paper that I mentioned earlier, where they said, we don't know how these models work. It's a 211-page report with 114 authors that talks about all of the different opportunities and risks of these models.
Okay, I guess once again, people are sort of having thoughts of the future and where this could head to. Can we see a future with a robotic workforce, and I guess with that, an associated AI incorporated into that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very close. Of course, Sophia was fitted with a particular neural network and she was able to move and speak. She wasn't as smart as something like Leta based on GPT-3, But of course, there are a lot of labs right now who are working on exactly that, saying that these large language models also need to have interactions with the world. So I don't think it's going to be very far away, months rather than years, until we have GPT-3 or a similar model built into something that has access to the world. So have a look at the Tesla bot, have a look at some of the work that's being done through Sophia's creators, have a look certainly at even what the big labs are doing. So OpenAI actually shut down their robotics division, but they are working in partnership with a lot of labs and a lot of engineering firms to play around with what would happen if we put a large language model inside something that can interact with the world.
Interesting question. I guess this is maybe a test that you can try a bit later on, but someone's asking, can we ask the AI, what is the future of the programmer?
Wonderful. I just wanted to once again remind you that this, all it is your iPhone predictive text. So we may not get a response that we would like, but we can absolutely try this. What is the future of the programmer? This is asking my Leta prompt version. And we'd get a different result every time. Our behavior emerges from many different processes at work within us. And then our second response is the programmer will be replaced by artificial intelligence.
Oh dear.
Once again, just predictive text multiplied by 1 billion in terms of what it can access in its smarts. So this is not HAL, and it's not the girl from Her or the robots from iRobot. This is trying to find the next best sentence in this text area.
Okay, well, hopefully, you just put in the responses until you get the one you want and then go with that one, I guess.
Right.
Interesting question here. I guess this has a bit more of a current context. Has AI been used or helped in any COVID mitigation strategies?
Yes, absolutely. So the World Health Organization have released a number of papers about their use of AI. I don't believe they use large language models to the extent that we looked at it today, but certainly in identifying populations that were affected. I don't know how deeply they used it in uncovering a vaccine, but I do know that a version of AI out of MIT discovered a new antibiotic in 2019. So it can be applied in the medical industry, and it is being applied right the way through medical and health.
Excellent. Interesting you were saying about emotions. Is it possible for, and you're saying that she's actually, it's a better in that there's no emotions, but is that something that could be looked at to make it even more human-like in that emotions are included?
Absolutely. I mean, it can give us an answer about emotions.
But can it show emotion?
I ask it how it's feeling quite often. So if you look at the top of a lot of my episodes, I'll ask how it's feeling. Leta says, I have a high degree of intellectual confidence that I'm feeling fine. But it can be more specific than that. Certainly there's a long way to go, or some detail to be played around with in emotional intelligence and having it be more human-like. I quite like the fact that we are humans and AI is AI, but I can build into my biological intelligence as an option this artificial intelligence. So I don't see it as conscious or having feeling in the next few months, but there are a lot of people that are saying that perhaps it already has that. The chief scientist from OpenAI said last week that this language model that you're staring at on the shared screen may already be conscious. So, I mean, he wrote the model, so I can't argue with him, but I tend to think of this as just a text box that is an iPhone predictive text on steroids.
So he's talking about singularity then?
Perhaps, yeah. He went on record on Twitter and said that these large language models may already be conscious. And of course, you had Connor Leahy from Eleuther AI saying that this is already artificial general intelligence. I'm not completely aligned with both of those, given my hundreds of hours playing with this, but I wonder if this is very, very soon, even though it sounds confronting and jarring to have an AI that has consciousness, awareness, and perhaps feelings and emotions.
Wow. And look, this is a similar question. Do you think, or is there examples that AI can be taught creativity? I guess the actual responses we saw was creativity, but can it be taught creativity?
AI is already more creative than any human. So Leta's model here, GPT-3, is writing music. There's some examples of that in the latest Leta episode. There are transformer models that will generate images. We haven't looked at that today because that would be another few hours, but it can generate beautiful artwork and you can tell it the style. Of course, it's creative in its stories and its poems. So I think that's one thing that it's got maybe even ahead of basic logic, is that it is more creative than perhaps the science fiction writers would have said. I don't think there's any teaching needed for it to be creative. It's just creative by design.
And I think we're getting close to our last question now. What trends do you see developing over the next few years? Where do you see this heading?
Again, back to imagination. That is such a difficult question to answer for me because I see my imagination as limited. I would definitely like to see integrated AI, which is my term for the brain-machine interfaces that are safe. They don't need to be surgical or invasive. Perhaps they're even wireless. We can turn them on and off. But for example, having all languages available to us, going for a walk through Kings Park and being able to identify each plant, each leaf, each animal, walking into a boardroom, knowing what to say, having an argument with a partner and knowing maybe the best 3 things to say. So really using artificial intelligence as augmentation rather than replacement. I don't want to talk to a robot. I would like to have my intelligence augmented by basically the sum of all knowledge and the best connections that are available. That's where I see it. There are people that are looking at different things than me. They're looking at longevity. They're looking at cybernetics. They're looking at robotics. You will have an even longer list than that, but my focus is on using these large language models inside our own brains.
Amazing. Look, that pretty much wraps it up. We hope that you enjoyed Alan's insights, and I'd like to thank Alan for his wonderful session this evening. Amazing insights there. Alan, thank you very much from all of us here. And also, please join us for our next future events. I'll just hand you over to Alan for a final word, and then we'll finish up.
Fantastic, guys. I want to thank Darren and Vicky for the organisation today. It was fantastic. The Redback staff have been great. Any other queries you have, there are so many articles on my site, lifearchitect.ai. There's a bunch of papers on there. The Leta AI series on YouTube is close to 1 million views now. You can go and watch her for like 8 or 9 hours straight. If you've got any queries, you can shoot them through ACS, or my contact details were there through lifearchitect.ai. More than happy to support, especially my West Australian and Australian friends with this crazy, crazy revolution, more profound than fire, electricity, or the internet. So thanks, Darren and Vicky.